Ted Cassidy, best known for playing Lurch in the original Addams Family, was 6 feet 9 inches tall. He died from a botched surgery to remove a tumor from his heart, which resulted from the condition of acromegaly that caused his iconic voice, facial structure, and towering height. After leasing the World Trade Center just weeks before 9/11, Larry Silverstein filed an insurance claim arguing that the attacks on the Twin Towers constituted 2 separate terrorist events, entitling him to double the $3.5 billion per occurrence payout. The case went to court, where the court agreed with Silverstein for 9 of the 20 insurance companies, forcing them to pay double. In total, Silverstein received around $4.55 billion for the collapse of the World Trade Center. In 1991, 5 young boys vanished while searching for salamander eggs on a mountain in South Korea, earning them the nickname the Frog Boys. Despite a massive nationwide search, their remains weren't discovered until 2002, just a few miles from where they disappeared. Initially ruled as deaths by exposure, an autopsy revealed that 4 boys had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and 1 had a gunshot wound. Even more unsettling, their clothes were found tied together with bullets wrapped in them. The site was suspiciously close to a military training zone, but police refused to investigate any military involvement. No one has been held accountable to this day. In 2018, a woman who'd been in a vegetative state for 14 years at Hacienda Healthcare gave birth unexpectedly, as staff had no idea she was even pregnant. DNA evidence later revealed she'd been raped by a nurse over several years. The nurse, Nathan Sutherland, pled guilty to sexual assault and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The case led to widespread reforms in how care facilities protect vulnerable patients. In April of 2024, 10-year-old Dakota Levi Stevens of Indiana died when his 340-pound foster mother, Jennifer Lee Wilson, pinned him to the floor with her whole body weight for 5 minutes as discipline. As Dakota screamed while gasping for air, she accused him of faking until he went limp, only then attempting CPR. Wilson was sentenced to 6 years in prison for reckless homicide, while it later emerged that Dakota had begged his neighbor to adopt him, saying his foster parents were abusive. In the early 90s, Andrew Martinez became a bizarre campus icon at UC Berkeley for attending classes completely nude, claiming he was protesting what he saw as oppressive social norms. Nicknamed the Naked Guy, he was repeatedly arrested, eventually expelled, and banned from campus after the school changed its policies just to stop him. But behind the act was a deepening struggle with mental illness that was later diagnosed as schizophrenia. Over the next decade, his life unraveled into a cycle of homelessness, institutionalization, and jail time. In 2006, at just 33 years old, Martinez was found dead by suicide in a Santa Clara jail cell. In 1965, 22-year-old Lester Eubanks brutally murdered 14-year-old Mary Ellen Diener after attempting to rape her behind a house near a laundromat, shooting her twice, going home to change, then returning to bludgeon her to death with a brick upon realizing she was still alive. He was sentenced to death, but in 1972, just 3 days before his scheduled execution, Lester's sentence was commuted when Ohio temporarily suspended the death penalty. Declared a model prisoner, Eubanks was granted a bizarre privilege the next year, an unsupervised Christmas shopping trip at a mall. At some point, he walked away and simply vanished, and has been on the run ever since. In July of 2023, Australian woman Erin Patterson invited her ex-in-laws and their relatives over for lunch, serving them a homemade beef Wellington laced with one of the deadliest fungi on Earth, death cap mushrooms. Within a few days, 3 of them were dead from agonizing organ failure, and a 4th barely survived after a liver transplant. Patterson claimed it was a tragic accident, but investigators found damning evidence, including a food dehydrator tied to the poison and inconsistent stories about where the mushrooms came from. She was recently convicted of 3 counts of murder and likely faces life in prison. In the mid-1800s, women across the Western world wore massive crinolines, hoop skirts that ballooned outward in all directions, often made from highly flammable fabrics like cotton. The size made them elegant but deadly. They caught fire easily near candles or fireplaces, and the sheer width made them nearly impossible to escape the flames. Within just 2 months in 1863, 19 English women burnt to death after their dresses caught fire. By the end of the decade, more than 3,000 people had died as a result of crinoline fires. Mexican painter Frida Kahlo's life was a haunting mix of brilliance and suffering. After contracting polio at age 6, classmates called her Frida the Cripple. At 18, she was nearly killed when a steel handrail impaled her during a bus crash, entering through her pelvis and exiting her abdomen. Her spine, pelvis, collarbone, and foot were completely shattered. She endured over 30 brutal surgeries, spent months in body casts, and painted while bedridden. Frida later suffered 5 to 7 miscarriages as a result, with one nearly killing her from blood loss, and she captured the horror in disturbing works like Henry Ford Hospital, showing herself naked, bleeding, and surrounded by a floating fetus and surgical tools. Later on, gangrene took her leg, only deepening her depression. She filled her diary with dark images and wrote, "I am not sick, I am broken." Though officially ruled a pulmonary embolism, many believe she intentionally overdosed at 47. Her final diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope to never return." When Alexander the Great died in 323 BC at the age of 32, his body reportedly showed no signs of decomposition for 6 days, astonishing the ancient Greeks and fueling the belief that he was a god. But modern medical experts have proposed a much darker explanation. Alexander may have suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that causes full body paralysis while leaving the person mentally aware. If true, it means he may have been mistakenly declared dead while still conscious, and was ultimately buried alive, fully aware of what was happening but unable to move or speak. In 1969, the Black Panthers launched a free breakfast program that fed thousands of hungry kids before school in the poorest black communities. But J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI saw it as a threat to national security, apparently fearing that it would make the Black Panthers look too humane. So in response, in multiple cities, police raided kitchens at dawn, tearing apart food supplies and in some cases even urinating on the groceries, making it clear that feeding black children was more threatening than letting them starve. In the 1990s, Belgium was shaken by the horrific case of Marc Dutroux, a convicted predator who, after early release from prison, built a hidden soundproof dungeon beneath his home. In 1995, he kidnapped two 8-year-old girls named Julie and Melissa and locked them inside the chamber. Later that year, he was jailed for several months after stealing a car and left the girls trapped in the basement. Dutroux claimed he told his wife to feed them, but she never did, and the girls slowly starved to death in total darkness. When police finally searched the home 1 year later, they found their bodies buried in the yard along with 2 more victims, teenage girls that Dutroux had drugged, abused, and murdered. Investigators had previously searched the home but missed the hidden cell, ignoring repeated warnings and reports of screams from neighbors. The public was completely outraged as over 300,000 people marched silently through Brussels in what became known as the White March, Belgium's largest protest since World War II. On July 14, 2017, Chester Bennington appeared in a carpool karaoke episode with comedian Ken Jeong. In the video, Chester looks joyful and full of life, laughing, cracking jokes, and singing along to Linkin Park hits as well as popular songs like Hey Ya. The footage offers a bittersweet glimpse of a man who appeared to be genuinely happy just 6 days before he tragically took his own life. In 1993, a Mexican zoo official was arrested in Miami after trying to illegally purchase a live gorilla, only to discover the animal was actually an undercover agent in a gorilla suit. The operation was part of a federal wildlife trafficking bust and led to one of the most ridiculous arrests in American history. As a child in the Philippines, boxing legend Manny Pacquiao ran away from home after witnessing a horrifying act. His father, drunken and enraged, killed and ate the family's pet dog. Devastated, Pacquiao fled and began living on the streets, sleeping in a cardboard box and surviving by selling donuts and scraps. The trauma of watching that happen to his beloved pet pushed him into a life of brutal survival at just 12 years old, an early glimpse of the hardship and violence that would define his relentless drive in the ring. In November of 2021, 66-year-old Spanish teacher Noema Grobert was ambushed during her daily walk in a park in Fairfield, Iowa by 2 of her 16-year-old students. Prosecutors said the teens had studied her routine, waited for her at the park, and brutally attacked her with a baseball bat before hiding her body beneath a pile of railroad ties. One of the suspects later shared details of the killing over Snapchat, messages that ultimately helped investigators build the case. Both teenagers were charged as adults with first-degree murder and later accepted plea deals that resulted in life sentences with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Perhaps most disturbingly, investigators said the motive was shockingly trivial. One of the students was angry over a bad grade in her Spanish class. In 2006, Rey Rivera vanished after receiving a sudden phone call and rushing out of his Baltimore home. Over a week later, his body was found in a locked conference room at the Belvedere Hotel, having somehow crashed through the roof from above. The hole he fell through was bizarrely placed, far too distant from any ledge to be reached by a typical jump, leading some to believe he may have been thrown off the roof or pushed from a higher level of the building. Even stranger, a cryptic note filled with movie references and secret society names was discovered taped behind his computer. The eerie case still remains officially unsolved. Just recently, paranormal investigator Dan Rivera was found dead in his hotel room while on the Devils on the Run tour in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Best known for touring with the infamous Annabelle doll from The Conjuring, the 54-year-old had spent years investigating haunted locations and was a prominent figure in the New England Society for Psychic Research. His sudden death with no signs of foul play has fueled eerie speculation, given his close proximity to one of the world's most notorious possessed objects. As of now, the cause of death remains unknown, as Rivera's mysterious end has only deepened the legend surrounding Annabelle. Dr. Fauci's NIH division, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, funded a series of horrific experiments on beagle puppies between 2016 and 2020. One of the most graphic studies involved dogs placed in mesh cages while sandflies were allowed to bite and feed on their heads, allegedly to study how certain parasites are transmitted in hopes of improving treatments for parasitic infections affecting humans. Some dogs were reportedly devocalized to prevent barking and were euthanized at the end of the studies. While Fauci wasn't personally conducting the tests, his agency approved the funding of about $375,000 for the research. Critics, including lawmakers and animal rights groups, condemned the studies as unnecessarily cruel and accused the NIH of lacking transparency and ethical oversight in approving such horrific procedures. The incident sparked widespread outrage online, with many calling for Dr. Fauci to be held responsible for the funding decisions made under his leadership. During World War II, Nazi SS units carried out one of the regime's most disturbing programs, the mass kidnapping of up to 200,000 Polish children for forced Germanization. After being taken from their families, the children were sent to SS-run children's education camps, where they were subjected to horrific racial selection exams. SS doctors measured their skulls, noses, eye colors, and body proportions, trying to determine whether each child looked Aryan enough to be turned into a German. If a child passed the test, they were renamed, stripped of their identity, and adopted into German families as if they'd never been Polish at all. But if they failed, their fate was much darker. Many were transported to concentration camps, where countless children died from starvation, disease, abuse, or execution. Only an estimated 10 to 15% of the kidnapped children were ever found and returned to Poland after the war. At the Nuremberg trials, the Allies confirmed the program a form of genocide, the deliberate attempt to erase an entire population by stealing and remaking their children. Conan O'Brien's world was rocked in 2024 when both of his parents, married for 66 years, died just 3 days apart. His father passed at 95, followed shortly by his mother at 92, leaving Conan to plan 2 funerals back-to-back before rushing overseas to continue filming Conan O'Brien Must Go. Still reeling from the loss, he was then forced to evacuate Los Angeles due to the raging wildfires. Conan later admitted he spent that entire period in a fugue state, emotionally numb and running on autopilot even as he hosted the Oscars. Tasmanian tiger was hunted to extinction after being falsely blamed for killing sheep, despite having jaws far too weak to take down large prey. The last known thylacine Benjamin froze to death while in captivity in 1936, just 2 months after the species finally gained legal protection. Croatian nurse Hedviga Golic died alone in her apartment in 1966 and was left undiscovered for 42 years. Her mummified remains were finally found in 2008 during renovations, after decades of neighbors assuming she'd simply moved away. Her electricity bills were quietly paid by the building's architect until shortly before her body was found. In August of 2004, 21-year-old Josh Hutcherson and his longtime friend, 23-year-old Frankie Brome, spent the night drinking at a bar in Georgia. On the drive home, Brome leaned his head outside the passenger side window, apparently to get some fresh air. At the same time, Hutcherson, heavily intoxicated with a blood alcohol level around .22, veered off the road and struck a support wire for a telephone pole, decapitating Brome instantly. Apparently unaware of what had happened, Hutcherson drove more than 10 miles home, parked the truck with Brome's headless body still inside, and went to bed. The next morning, a neighbor discovered the body still inside the vehicle, and Brome's head was later recovered from the crash site. Hutcherson was charged with vehicular homicide and pleaded guilty in 2005, receiving a 5-year sentence. In a surprising twist, Brome's family, who had known Hutcherson for years, publicly asked the court for some leniency, stating they didn't want Hutcherson imprisoned. Known online as Pioneers Productions, Randy Stair became obsessed with the cartoon Danny Phantom and was convinced that he'd be reincarnated as a character on the show named Ember. While working a night shift at a grocery store in Pennsylvania, he blocked all the exits, pulled out 2 shotguns, and murdered 3 coworkers before turning the gun on himself in the frozen foods aisle. Police later uncovered a trove of videos and writings outlining his delusions and plans, in which he explained his belief that these murders would allow him to cross over into the animated world of Danny Phantom. During a morning broadcast in 1974, Florida news reporter Christine Chubbuck calmly announced, "In keeping with Channel 40's policy of bringing you the latest in blood and guts, you're going to see another first, attempted suicide." She then proceeded to take her own life on live TV. Many viewers and even people in the control room assumed it was a scripted segment or a special effects stunt. Christine had reportedly long struggled with depression, loneliness, and frustration over the channel's focus on violent topics and sensationalism. Her death completely shocked the nation and remains one of the most disturbing moments in broadcast history. In August of 2023, Lil Tay's Instagram suddenly announced that she and her brother had died, sparking worldwide shock online. But within a day, she appeared alive, calling the post a cruel hack. Meta confirmed her account had been compromised, but suspicions lingered. Tay publicly accused her estranged father of planting the hoax, while others believe her brother staged it for attention. Then in 2024, she revealed that she'd been diagnosed with an actual life-threatening heart tumor and underwent successful open heart surgery, posting photos from her hospital bed. In 1978, 22-year-old art student Harold Brown fell 324 feet, nearly 30 stories, through the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco after crawling into a ventilation shaft. A guard who witnessed the fall swore he heard Brown yelling "whoopee" on the way down, as if enjoying the plunge. Against all odds, Brown survived the impact on the concrete base with both legs shattered, kneecaps destroyed, and a crushed heel bone, but no internal injuries. Minutes later, he regained consciousness and shocked rescuers by singing Camptown Races as they carried him out. John Jessup, a once respected politician in Indiana, did the unspeakable to his own daughter while celebrating her 21st birthday in Las Vegas. The former Hancock County Commissioner pleaded guilty to attempted sexual assault after allegedly getting his daughter extremely drunk before assaulting her back at their hotel. Prosecutors say Jessup provided her with multiple Long Island iced teas, took her to a strip club where she became so incapacitated she needed a wheelchair ride back to the hotel, and later assaulted her while she was unconscious. He was sentenced in 2025 to 6 to 25 years in prison, must register as a sex offender, and is barred from all contact with his daughter for life. In October of 2015, 21-year-old Dutch medical student Sophia Koutier vanished while on a Ugandan safari after stepping away for a bathroom break just a short distance from her lodge. About 3 weeks after she disappeared, searchers found her belongings in eerie condition. Her purse and one shoe neatly placed on the ground, while the other shoe was never recovered, scraps of her fabric tied to branches like trail markers, and her underwear bizarrely hanging 15 feet high in a tree. No blood, remains, or sign of a struggle were ever found, as authorities quickly wrote it off as a wild animal attack, though experts noted that predators don't hang underwear in trees or arrange items so deliberately. Her mother has spent years fighting the official explanation, describing how it felt like the earth had simply swallowed her up, since not even a single fragment of a bone has ever been recovered. Nearly a decade later, Sophia's disappearance remains one of Africa's most haunting safari mysteries. Before becoming famous as Dracula, Saruman, and Count Dooku, Christopher Lee witnessed the last public execution in France. In 1939, while visiting Paris as a teenager, he joined a crowd gathered outside a prison to watch convicted serial killer Eugene Weidman be executed by guillotine. Lee later recalled the atmosphere as disturbing, describing spectators climbing onto roofs just for a glimpse of the execution. Because the crowd became so unruly and the spectacle was described as shameful, the French government banned executions immediately following Weidman's death. During the Chechen Wars, Surgeon Kasan Bayev was reportedly the only doctor serving nearly 80,000 civilians in parts of war-torn Chechnya. As artillery strikes and bombings flooded makeshift hospitals with casualties, Bayev often worked for days without sleep, performing amputations, emergency brain surgeries, and other life-saving procedures with little anesthesia and makeshift medical tools. During one particular 48-hour period, he reportedly carried out 67 amputations and 8 brain surgeries. Refusing to choose sides, he treated wounded Chechen fighters, Russian soldiers, and civilians alike, leading to both sides accusing him of helping the enemy and threatening him with death.